Hello and welcome back to Histories Tech, and today we are looking at the Messerschmitt Me-163 Komet, the only operational rocket-powered fighter. Now I have to make that distinction because during the 1920s into the 1930s there were several attempts to make a rocket-powered aircraft. However, a lot of them were test aircraft and things like that, and the Me-163 Komet was the only fighter aircraft to be rocket-powered. But let's go ahead and look at how this rather unique aircraft came to be. Now, the idea of propelling an aircraft by means of rocket actually predates Orville Wilbur Wright's flight. So 1 year before that, a famous flight, Pedro Paulet came up with this, the avian torpedo. And what's even crazier at the time is he came up with an idea of using a liquid propellant rocket, when at the time the standard for any sort of rocket was black powder. He actually spent the next several decades trying to get a government to support and help make his dream come true. But the only government he could get was Nazi Germany, and he refused to help them. However, this didn't dissuade the Germans, and they continued developing rocket technology on their own with the Opelrack program, which was a series of rocket tests utilizing this Alexander Lippich's plane, which is basically a glider plane that was originally known as the Rocketten Entente, and they basically just strapped some rockets to it. And the success of this test kept pushing the Germans to keep developing rocket-powered aircraft. And we get the Heinkel HE-176, which is going to become the world's first aircraft solely propelled by liquid rocket propellant to fly. And while this aircraft was extremely successful, all major work on future aircraft would kind of be stalled at this time. And the only projects that continued forward were the ones already in development. And since they didn't have the financial backing to start a whole new aircraft, they took Lippich's Delta IV design, and they basically strapped a liquid propellant rocket engine to the back of it. And thus we're going to get the early prototype of what we're going to know as the Komet. This project was actually so secretive, they actually used an earlier Messerschmitt design, the Messerschmitt Bf-163, in place of it. So they actually used another aircraft's identification, basically to throw everyone off on what this plane being developed was. This aircraft, despite some issues with some irregular landing gear with it, actually during its initial testing managed to set a record of 624 miles per hour in leveled flight, which was unheard of and not surpassed again until after the war. From the prototype stage to the design would be continuously developed. The Me-163B, which is basically the production model, will become the mainstay of their fleet. However, due to the continuous development upgrade, the aircraft's actually going to become extremely problematic. The B models now had a new, more powerful engine that mixed hydrazine hydrate and methanol. And while it was highly combustible, it was extremely toxic to humans and deadly. Additionally, this engine was way more complex, and the reliability of it went down, which is why we never see a ME Komet actually exceed the prototype's speed. It did gain things like a higher altitude with this engine and things like that, and even a longer duration of about 7.5 minutes of flight time. But the problem with that is that these propellant tanks were known to leak. They would actually rupture during these rough landings because these landed on a skid, and because of that, they were basically death traps to an inexperienced pilot. But as this aircraft could easily intercept American B-17s, it was basically put into the field from about August 1943 to about August 1944, kind of on a limited basis to see what it could do. And the main strategy was basically get the aircraft up to speed, usually 500 miles an hour, go straight up through the B-17s, and then dive back down at them. And its main gun was actually a pretty large 30mm cannon. However, it was a slow-firing cannon, and it was only good at short range, meaning that as it got close to the bombers, it would just whiz right past them and not be able to hit them accurately. And in order to try and basically help with this issue, the Germans tried to get creative. This included installing a 10-shot, short-barreled 50mm gun that pointed straight upwards, so that in the dive, they wouldn't have to aim directly at the aircraft. They could just fly past the bomber and fire these rounds right at it. Now, the biggest issue the Germans sought to address with the Me-163B was the fact that its flight time was only 7.5 minutes. So to compete with the emerging jet-engined aircraft, a new design was developed, the 163C. And this was actually going to use a twin-chambered rocket motor. So a few 163Bs were converted to allow for this new engine design. And they were going to see as much as a 50% improvement in not only thrust capacity, but duration. And they even managed to set an unofficial speed record of 702 miles per hour before the rudder surfaces broke away from the aircraft. To offset this, the 163C models actually had a redesigned wing surface to allow for the higher speed. While 3 were planned to be built, they only ever built 1, and it never even had the new engine design in it. Had the war continued, the final evolution in the Komet would have been known as the 163D. And this would have actually used the standard tricycle landing gear setup and a new, larger rocket motor. But that's not the end for the Komet. The design is actually going to be shared with the Japanese during World War II, and we're going to see the Mitsubishi JAM. The design was actually brought to the Japanese by the Germans on board 2 submarines. However, the second submarine arrived late, and the Japanese were so desperate for the aircraft that they ended up trying to reverse engineer the designs for the parts they were missing themselves, and ended up crashing their prototype. However, once the final parts did arrive and the Japanese were able to start producing their own, the plans had been to create a Navy and Army version of the aircraft. However, only a handful of aircraft were ever finished, and resources were diverted elsewhere. Now, as for the overall results of the ME-163, when you put it as a numbers game, it was not a successful aircraft. 370 aircraft created. It's believed that it only managed to knock out between 9 and 18 Allied aircraft with 10 losses, with even more losses due to training errors and development errors of the aircraft. Meaning this aircraft had an incredibly high failure rate. As for what happened to the Komet after the war, out of the 370 produced, 10 of them managed to survive the war. They're located in the countries of Australia, Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom, and the United States, with 2 Japanese-built frames, 1 surviving in California and 1 in Japan. Additionally, there is 1 replica built for gliding purposes and a few static replicas up on display around the world. But that's it for the ME-163 Komet. Now, basically, that's pretty much it for the idea of an interceptor-based rocket-powered aircraft. The Russians did try to build their own, the MiG I-270, which was 2 prototypes that they ended up crashing. After that, rocket-powered aircraft are going to be relegated to basically testing the speed of sound, altitude, and being used basically for additional speed on jet-propelled aircraft. But basically, the story of an operational rocket-powered fighter starts and ends with the Messerschmitt Me-163. But that's it for today. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to talking to you on the next time.